Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Radiohead Retrospective of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we cover the discography of one of rock's most significant bands. We are talking about Radiohead's In Rainbows this week. Last week, we talked about Hail to the Thief, and now we are here, a very significant release, significant album from the band. We have some aids
We
for us.
do.
Some of
We
us
have
do. That
three
clues
of
you into our thoughts.
the 3 or 4 of us that are shills for this band have physical media. I have a cool story
First
about
vinyl I ever bought.
sick choice.
Saoirse might have some. Saoirse probably
Yeah,
owns
she probably
it.
does too. Cool story about this physical CD copy that I got is that when I bought the CD, and I'm going to say this, and you might think it's like, what the fuck are they doing? They didn't actually send me this. They sent me the disc in like a little slip, and they sent me the cover art as a sticker, and the back drop as a sticker as well. And like everything was all disassembled, and I had to put the CD together myself, which, most of the time you just be like, how fucking stupid. What a dumb gimmick. Like, I don't want to put the CD together myself.
You get what you're paid for, am I right?
But like, it was really cool. Like, I enjoyed the process of doing that. And it felt like it was reflective of the kind of deconstructed or like unconventional way in which this album was originally released. So we've charted this narrative with Radiohead, where we've talked about each of their albums in succession, and not only how each album builds on their sound and their exploration with their instrumentation and their arrangements, but also how Radiohead, obviously highly conscious of the narrative of the band, take each album as an excuse to do something to put a wrinkle into that narrative, or to develop their sound, or to develop their band identity and all that sort of stuff. And In Rainbows is no exception. In Rainbows is a point where Radiohead go from kind of cultural figureheads in terms of the impact of their music to actually starting to be at the forefront of not just the sound of music or whatever, which actually, to be honest, they're not really at the forefront of by the time we get to the late 2000s. They've gone past their kind of emperor's era, but they're still highly influential, and they're still having a real impact. And the way that they do that is by being ahead of the curve in terms of how music is consumed. And the future of how music is going to exist in the landscape of media, basically. The encroaching change that would be the streaming era, which hadn't really happened yet in 2007. Like, I think there were some primitive streaming services that existed in that time. It was certainly pre-Spotify. But Radiohead were cognizant of, and had of course been well aware since the advent of Napster, of the importance of the online world in terms of disseminating music, and in terms of music consumption, and in terms of generating attention towards your music, generating fan base and feeding that fan base. And so Radiohead have always kind of been one of the things that's been interesting about them as a band, and in terms of how they've operated, is they've always been heavily conscious of that. And they've always been really kind of creative with the ways in which they market and the ways in which they direct their music to their audiences. Something we didn't really touch on when we talked about Kid A is the fact that during that protracted recording process, Radiohead were actually still quite online. Like, Ed kept an online diary of the recording sessions of Kid A. They released lots of sort of weird teaser videos that were called blips, some of which screened on TV, but a lot of which were disseminated online. So even as early as like the turn of the century, they were experimenting with the internet as a way of being an integral part of their album cycle and an integral part of their music and how it's consumed. And that feels like it reaches its biggest sort of apotheosis with the advent of In Rainbows, which Radiohead worked on meticulously over a period of multiple years. I mean, in the interim between Hail to the Thief and In Rainbows, it's worth noting the longest gap between Radiohead albums up to this point in their career. Hail to the Thief obviously being a 2003 record, hot on the heels of the Kid A Amnesiac double. And then you get a period where Radiohead go without releasing music. Thom Yorke releases his first solo album, The Eraser, in 2006. The band continue to kind of explore their individual musical identities rather than just everything being engineered and focused into Radiohead. And I think it's fair to say that this gap gives Radiohead a chance to, I guess, rejuvenate, because while we all think very positively, broadly speaking, of How to the Thief, and it has a number of classic songs that we discussed on it. It also felt, as we talked about, also to be transitional, to be not quite realizing of a clear vision in the way that their best records are. And so I think it's fair to say that a bit of time away and a bit of time to really reflect and meticulously work on music definitely helped with In Rainbows. Before I even get to the relevance of the internet in terms of how it was released, the recording process, again, heavily contrasts with the recording process of How to the Thief. We talked about how that record was recorded in 2 weeks, lightning quick. They went into the studio, they banged the songs out, and that was it. Whereas In Rainbow's recording process calls back to familiar stories that we've heard with regard to albums like OK Computer and Kid A, where it's this meticulous working through of ideas, going through like dozens and dozens of demos of songs, trying to find out the fully realized final vision of the musical idea. I mean, we'll get into some of the most famous examples of development of some of the songs on this record eventually when we talk about them specifically, but it's fair to say a lot was going into this, and Radiohead were being quite mysterious about it as well. Like if you went to any of their shows in the interim period between How to the Thief and In Rainbows, you would likely hear a song that ended up on In Rainbows, although you might hear it in a radically different version. But so there was a lot of kind of mystique and questioning in terms of what would Radiohead do next? What would the next sort of evolution of Radiohead even sound like? And while we were all wondering this, well, not we, I mean, I was 10 years old at the time, so I didn't know what a Radiohead was. But while the world at large was wondering this, Radiohead were busy working on their most impactful and influential release cycle ever. And that is the infamous, not infamous, because it's well regarded as a stroke of genius, but the famous Pay What You Want surprise release of In Rainbows. I believe it wasn't a surprise release in the form that we think of them now, where the album just appears like that with no warning. It wasn't a Beyonce. I think they gave a couple of days or a week's advance notice that, hey, we will be releasing this album in a week. But they entirely forewent the traditional album release cycle, the press cycle, completely. And it was like, in a week, we're releasing an album. And then all of a sudden, the album existed on Radiohead's website, and you could pay what you want for it. You could download it directly. There was no physical media at first. It was just this digital file of the album that existed. And Radiohead said, "It's up to you," was what it said on their website in terms of what the album cost. You could pay as much or as little as you wanted, including nothing. This was sort of widely kind of criticized at the time. I think Radiohead received some kind of backlash from certain industry people who felt that it was devaluing music, or that it was a gimmick that was, promotional and would sort of never catch on, or perhaps took away from the music or whatever. There was definitely some resistance to that. But it's fair to say that the release cycle for In Rainbows was an overwhelming success for Radiohead. They made, I don't have specific figures on hand, but they made a lot of money, despite the fact that they offered this album up for free, which tells you a lot about Radiohead's trust in their fans and in music listeners in general to actually place value on the music themselves, not having to have, studio execs dictate the value of music, actually letting music listeners dictate the music's value was a huge statement, was very meaningful, and in many ways put power into the hands of people in a way that the ongoing evolution of the internet was making inevitable, but that up until this point, music labels, bands had resisted or ignored or not really fully tried to understand. With the release cycle of In Rainbows, Radiohead were saying that we understand how you consume music. We value you as fans, and we're going to show you that we value you by not condescending to you, by offering this up to you and letting you give back to us whatever you feel we deserve. And I know that that's not like, that's more of an interesting historical detail than something that we can analyze, but I think it's meaningful in terms of doing this retrospective, demonstrating who Radiohead are as musicians and their relationship with music and their relationship with the people who consume their music and what matters to them. And it says a lot about them, and also says a lot about, you know, the music industry in a way that is far more potent and lasting and effective than writing a diss song or some kind of screed that like other artists would do. It's a much more powerful and effective and potent and meaningful statement as well, because it actually has an effect on music listeners that is positive. And one could also say as well that it sort of sets the bar low a little bit. Like it lowers people's expectations for the record itself, which is, I think it's fair to say, a pretty invigorating surprise in the chronology of Radiohead. It's not that In Rainbows doesn't sound like any Radiohead record that precedes it. In many ways, it feels like a more successful execution of what Hail to the Thief tried to do in terms of incorporating all these different sounds and aspects of what Radiohead, the 5 members of Radiohead, can do as musicians into these single flowing cohesive songs that don't feel like anything has been kind of stamped or put into them for the sake of being there. And so that is the background of In Rainbows, and the setting of expectations and the meaningful release of this record. I think it's a really cool story. I even now still reading about it. But yeah, and now we're left with the album itself.
It's kind of something you have to bring up if you're going to talk about this album,
Yeah.
just because it was so singular of a move at the time.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about the influence of musicians all the time, and the influence of Radiohead in terms of like all these bands that would take from Radiohead's sound and the various things that they do. But in many ways, the release of In Rainbows might be the most actually genuinely, tangibly influential thing that they ever did. In terms of dictating the landscape of music. And it's meaningful because of how big they are as well. It wouldn't be as meaningful if fucking, you know, Joe Band did it. It's meaningful because Radiohead, one of the biggest bands in the world, did it and set a standard that could not be ignored. And to do that...
Joe Band, though, it's good stuff.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I don't think about that as much when I listen to the music on In Rainbows anymore, but it does feel like it sets the slate for this album, especially how kind of relaxed and kind of carefree and unfussy this album is compared to some of the herky-jerky anxiety of the records that precede it as well. I think that's maybe a through-in line from this backstory to the sound of the record itself. It's not to say this isn't a record that doesn't have, you know, anxious moments on it or whatever, but I feel like whenever I listen to In Rainbows, whenever I put it on, it feels like Radiohead at their most relaxed. It feels like Radiohead at their most understated at certain points as well. It feels like Radiohead are just organically letting great music flow out of them, which is ironic, I guess, considering how painstaking the process of making this record supposedly was. It feels so effortless in a way that really starkly contrasts with Hail to the Thief and Amnesiac, which, and even Kid A, although it's more in a more positive way with Kid A, which those records feel labored over. Those records feel just really tightly wound. And this is a tightly wound record in a sense. Like there's not a lot of, you know, reverb or whatever and certain aspects of it, but it is a record that feels like it's flowing in this really just carefree way, and it's just moving through these various modes in a way that feels like it just feels so natural whenever I listen to it, and it's very exciting and invigorating, and it makes for an album that I think is very easy to put on when you're in just about any mood, because it will nicely complement wherever you're at. So yeah, I've done a lot of talking. What do you guys think of the overall sound of In Rainbows and what it represents relative to the records that precede it?
The way I always think of it is if you just kind of crammed everything they've been doing thus far in the 2000s all into one album. And obviously that's a reductive statement, but I think what I'm getting at really is that there's very clear DNA of each album they've made thus far in that decade in both a refined manner and a sort of new interpolation. But it's also very singular, I think, in just how warm it is, how comforting the album itself sounds. Also, like the level to which it is dense. Like every album they made in the 2000s is notably dense in terms of production and just the pure sonic variance of textures. But yeah, but I don't think, take a song like Nude, for instance, in the first, like, I don't know, 30 seconds of that song, just the way everything swirls and plays off of each other, it's just like unparalleled in the discography thus far.
Yeah, like I said, it's that sense of just relaxation that this record has. Warm is probably the best word I could possibly think of to describe this album. And that, I think, maybe is the crux of how it differentiates, is that a lot of the real kind of like heaving anxiety that has defined a lot of the Radiohead records leading up to it is just melted away. And it's unfussy, and it allows you to kind of linger in the actual beauty of Radiohead, which we've talked about on a lot of their records, how beautiful they can be. But in Rainbows feels like the first moment where they really sustain and linger within that beauty. And as a result, it feels like an album that they desperately needed to make, like especially with a career so far that is so defined by that jerkiness, that jankiness, that meticulousness. To have an album that actually just kind of cuts loose and lets you linger in the beauty of the textures that they're able to create is a real treat. It feels like a real treat when you listen to this, and feels like, oh, yes, finally, yes. I mean, to me anyway, those are the kinds of things that I experienced when putting this on with the context of having analyzed all their records leading up to it. It's just such a breath of fresh air. August, I'd love to hear what you think of this, whether you perceive it to be a change in a direction, or this evolution of Radiohead, this kind of new wrinkle to their sound, the way everything comes together on this album.
In a sense, there's definitely new elements and ideas being brought into this record, and its sound, it's really warm, kind of it almost feels inviting in a way no record before it in their discography has. And I think that's the principal word I would use to describe just the sound. The production is inviting. Like, no longer are a lot of the electronics they're using these really harsh, like buzzing kind of drum patterns you'd associate with something more akin with like an Autechre. It reminds me more of like the gentler moments like X Tall by Aphex Twin. That's kind of where I think their electronic direction has been taken on this album.
Yeah, and it's like there's not this huge distinction between the organic sound and the electronic sound, right? It's also kind of melded together on this record. Like it doesn't feel like certain starker textures stand out from the warmth of it all. It's all just kind of coalescing together in this very sort of just unified sound. It doesn't, yeah, there's a lack of contrast on this record, which I actually think is a good thing, broadly speaking. On the note of contrast, just to clarify as well, like it's a record of singular sound, definitely, but that's not to say there isn't contrast in this record. It's not a record that sits in a single mode, obviously, for 10 songs. I mean, you compare lots of songs that are back to back on this record, like Bodysnatchers into Nude or Jigsaw into Videotape, and you've got two very starkly different songs, but the unifier is that consistent sound. The unifier is that warmth. The unifier is that integration within the mixes, such that it feels like everything is kind of coming together, rather than kind of pushing at the things that are around it, if that makes any sense. And so, I mean, again, there's a lot of, basically every song on here is beloved by at least some faction of Radiohead fans, if not all factions of Radiohead fans. So we might as well try and do them justice by talking about them all. And I mean, it really kicks off with Radiohead breaking the door down with 15 Step, which is this absolutely ballistic opener that feels like the band are really kind of like showing off their chops, showing off how invigorated they have become, right? With that really kind of distorted sort of static electronic intro that then feels like just absolute cacophony, but turns into a really steady sudden beat. And then you get the guitar coming in and it all starts to again coalesce, that being the theme of this record, is of sounds coalescing such that the distinctions between them don't feel stark, they feel like they're interrelated. What do you guys think of this song?
I think one of the most notable things about this song and the record as a whole is, like, the biggest thing I think it takes from something like Kid A is the really strong percussive focus that is on every song here. Like, I really think this is like the rhythm section album in Radiohead's discography. I think this is easily, collectively, Selway's best kit work overall. But just the way that even the most contemplative songs have this really propulsive beat to them, and I think it's just enrapturing and keeps the album interesting in so many different ways you wouldn't have thought of.
I think the album starting out with this song is a good choice because I think it starts with the song that's in 5/4, so it leaves you a little disoriented and kind of spun around almost, which I think is a very intentional feeling they're trying to evoke, especially in the wake of this being the opener after Hail to the Thief, where you don't really have anything that's quite this propulsive and charging. I really do like the fusion of both organic and programmed drum sounds, especially in this intro, and the way after about 40 seconds where you hear like everything kind of slowly fade away and drop out, and then it just gallops forward into the song proper, I think it's very, very interesting.
August kind of used a turn of phrase that stuck out to me that kind of spins you around. And I think that if you really dig into this album, it's kind of inviting warm, organic nature is something that is definitely a good thing that gives the album its own identity in the discography. But it also might lend you to like listening to this as a more aesthetic experience, which I don't think is unfair at all. But I also think in terms of themes and construction, musically speaking, it's just as remarkable, if not more so. And the idea of things looping in on themselves and sort of the sense of like a circular path kind of comes up in both the themes of the lyrics and in the construction of the music itself. Like how later on Weird Fishes, for example, that's a song where it kind of thematically loops in on itself, but also the two distinct instrumental paths of it just sort of loop in on themselves with the drums. And it kind of talks about here, it's sort of the start point. It's the beginning of a particular path in this character. It's like it's not as directly narrative as something like Kid A or OK Computer, or even something that's like, I guess, a little bit more like Amnesiac. But like there's a lot of themes here that have to do with psychosis and neuroses of like the human condition. And I always thought that was appropriate because In Rainbows to me is like moving and listening to something that is alive. It feels like something that is like you're actively witnessing a life form like move. That's what all the organic nature of this album is it serves of to me. Like there's like their decision to go with predominantly mostly organic guitar plucking instead of just the tones so that you can hear them, or even in the drums, it's just like you feel like this is basically a live album. And if you go and watch the basement sessions of In Rainbows, these songs are exactly the same. There's basically no difference at all. And like even down to Thom's vocals, it's like they just have such a tight grasp on what they're doing. And with 15 Step, it sort of sets everything in motion of the thematic sense of everything being in a sense of disarray. Like the main character of this is just sort of like expressing a dissatisfaction that's sort of innate. And there's a lot of stuff I can go into with the writing on this album, but it has a lot to do with, there's lots of biblical allusions on this album.
Yep.
There are lots of allusions to that of the story of Faust Arp, but also Mephistopheles. And this came from the fact that Thom Yorke's wife actually has a doctorate, I believe, in like it's like a certain like
I think I read this. She did a thesis on Dante, I think.
Yeah, and that was something that Thom was really, really interested in at the time when making this album, is just sort of the idea of being lured and tempted, like the character in the Faust myth, who is a doctor who grows bored of his life and his success and wants this promise of wealth and sex and knowledge, except he goes to hell at the end. And this is sort of the beginning, the expression of dissatisfaction. And I love how uncomfortable the song kind of is at first. Like those little stabs are so fuzzy. It's almost like, it's funny because it's such a departure from their like more mechanical robotic IDM stuff. And yet this begins and it kind of sounds like an IDM thing, except it immediately goes away from that. And it sort of expresses this weird collision of different sounds. And I fucking love that. And it's so intimately mixed. Like everything is mic'd so that it sounds like it is right next to you. It's happening right here. So when there's something like a sweeping chime or something, or a synth that comes across on this song, it sounds so vast. It sounds insanely large. Yeah. And it's just like, it's a song without a very distinct palette, but it lets you know everything that you're in for. So I think it's a perfect opener.
I 100% agree. And I love the sense of contrast in this song as well. Like when that opens with those really glitchy electronic sounds, and then that really clean and almost like just tasty guitar lick comes in. It's this entirely incredible contrast between these two sounds, and then that guitar tone, that warmer tone, sort of overwhelms the song, and it's like a bit of a subversion, right? Like it sets you up like, oh, as soon as the record starts, you're in this anxious space, and then that anxiety sort of melts away. And so, yeah, I think in many ways, this is a record that kind of conceptualizes some sort of journey, some sort of odyssey, very much influenced by those things that you've spoken about. And I'm looking forward to you getting into that a little bit more. Don't be afraid, incidentally, about going deep on the lyrics here as well. I'm sure that fans will appreciate that with this record in particular, because I think this is probably my favorite.
Simply not something I've heard talked about in regards to this album, is people don't really dissect the meanings of the songs ever. They're kind of just really obsessed with how they sound. And I get it, but also there's a whole lot here that people are missing out on.
These are Thom Yorke's best lyrics. This album is his lyrical peak, I think. The songwriting here is just so consistently moving. But I love that, again, it starts off with that line, how come I end up where I started, that perpetual dissatisfaction that you talk about. And I like the kind of meta aspect of this too, because it's like Radiohead are this band that are in this constant state of exploration, this constant state of like considering where to move, how to move forward, and also how to deal with expectations, and how to develop oneself, and what the relationship between developing as a band and developing as a person, in the sense of like, when you have a certain level of expectation on you, everything you do feels like it's not good enough, and you feel like you're set in these rhythms, this stasis. It's very reflective of Thom's increasing desire to advance outwards. I'm sure that would have influenced his desire to release a solo album before doing another Radiohead record, right? This sense of restlessness, this sense of needing to progress, the sense of needing to find meaning. And needing to not stay in the same place. It's really perfectly, that thesis is laid out immediately with that opening line. And yeah, the rest of the song, like especially with that title lyric, 15 steps and then a sheer drop, it makes you feel like, you know, the ground is falling out from under you. I also wonder whether that title is a reference to like 3 bars of the song, with it being in 5/4. But anyway, overthinking it heaps. It's an amazing opener. It's very detailed and intricate, and so much going on that perfectly sets the tone for what you can expect from the rest of this record, and in a way that is, as August perfectly stated, it could not be anything other than the opener. It perfectly throws you into this place that the album will continue to explore. And then we go into Bodysnatchers, which is arguably the biggest fucking banger on this album. An
Banger.
absolute treat of a song that I feel like doesn't get nearly enough love. I see why people are drawn to certain songs when they talk about this record, which we'll get to, but I feel like not enough people talk about Bodysnatchers, particularly in terms of some of the lyrical themes of the song as well, which build on some of the feelings of 15 Step and feed into a lot of the rest of this album too. But also just the fact that Radiohead are executing a musical idea here, a real sort of like crunchy, heavy sound that feels like the most fullest realization of experiments with heavier music and songs like Mixomatosis or whatever that were good songs, but didn't really feel like the fullest possible realization of this really heavy, rhythm-focused aesthetic. And yeah, I mean, shout out to the fucking rhythm section. I'm going a bit all over the place here, but I forgot to shout out. Colin has this great bass run in 15 Step where it's like, and it's just like so warm and just sick, and it adds this extra layer to it. And then when you go into Bodysnatchers, and it's this really kind of like turned up, thick sound that's just immediately in your face. It's just, it's juicy, and the way this song the way this song develops musically as well, I mean it starts out in this very kind of like loping repetitive mode, but then by the time you get halfway through the song, you've got the switch up that's happening, this really great melodic change in the bridge, and then that builds and builds and builds as Thom is singing, "Is a light gone out for you because the light's gone out for me." That's one of my favorite individual instrumental parts of this whole record, is that little change that happens halfway through this song. And it just shows how Radiohead, as ever, are bursting with ideas, but more than ever know how to glue them together in a way that is satisfying first and foremost.
I can't believe people talk shit on this song. Like, I mean, straight up, you ever just be a loser? Like, I don't know. I don't even know what to say to that.
I think perhaps what it is I don't think people hate it, but I think maybe perhaps people don't see how it's related to the core of what this album is. People maybe come to this album because they think of it as the chill Radiohead album, which, you know, it is to certain extents. And perhaps, you know, the heaviness of a song like Bodysnatchers disrupts that. But it's really necessary to the flow of this record. It's really necessary to the impact this album has. I mean, if every song was like Nude, then it wouldn't work. You need to have that that sort of level of dynamics.
I would also not call it even terribly heavy by Radiohead standards of what they've done. It is certainly the heaviest thing on this album, but I think the guitar work here still does give a very distinctly summery, warm, bright overall sheen to this song. It really does feel, with that heaviness, like and that balance with the kind of brighter elements, like a refinement on a lot of the ideas, like a mixomatosis on Hail to the Thief. This song is a really good track just about disassociation with a lot of the world around you. It feels like sitting in the back seat of a car, almost, is how I'd describe it. And there's like allusions to Diving Bell and the Butterfly and Locked In Syndrome with the blink your eyes lines, which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, just that sense of paralysis that the song is getting at, the sense of like, you know, confinement and being unable to move. And of course, the metaphorical extension of that, you know, the subtext, being unable to like fully express yourself.
Yeah, and
I don't know what
and I mean, that following up a song about being dissatisfied with where your life is going and looking for an out. I think that's obviously a very purposeful piece of sequencing there.
Yeah, I think Bodysnatchers is a great way to just sort of start off the record kicking from the first track, just because it's immediately just a fuzzier, aggressive, just more textural direction for Radiohead to take their sound in. It's just kind of immediately disarming. And despite the kind of spry, upbeat tone that it has, it does have that kind of lyrical darkness of Thom, who is speaking from a kind of dual perspective where you can either interpret him as looking on the outside looking in, of being like seeing and feeling a sense of disrepair like in your own skin, but also I think it can be interpreted from the point of view of said body snatcher, and kind of alluding to the whole cyclical part of in Rainbows. I sort of think there is kind of a looping quality to this album that I think can be argued that it kind of loops in on itself. And until you kind of listen to the album like that, that's sort of where that particular interpretation comes from, is that it's a different person than the last one sort of coming through and feeling that sense of anxiety that was alluded to on 15 Step. But one of the reasons I really like this song is that it's speaking to a lot of the things that Radiohead had already covered. Like, you know, on Kid A, we talked about How to Disappear Completely, which I think in a sense is very analogous to this song in terms of what it means. It's just speaking on it in a really different way. It's kind of, you know, that's the pulled back perspective and it's vast, whereas this is really, really intimate and fast and fuzzy. And it sort of represents in Rainbows, in a sort of like it's like a microcosm for the whole thing, because, you know, like I don't think I fully appreciated this album, as funny as this sounds, because this has been one of my favorite albums for years now, but I don't think I fully appreciated it until we did this retrospective, in a sense, and in the order that we did it in. Because the thing about it is that that's sort of, you know, Kid A, OK Computer, Amnesiac, Hail to the Thief, it's all about the dystopic blend of the modern reality and their take on it. And it's all very, very much like about a lot of the same ideas that are very, very specific to them. So then Rainbows comes along and it does have that biggest gap in between albums. And I think it's best represented on a song like this, because In Rainbows is so, it's like as close to unprecedented as this band gets, because it has largely nothing to do with that feeling of the, you know, the overwhelming world. This is an album that is from within. It takes place completely in, like, within a sense of interiority that the others don't have, and it sort of emphasizes that organic sound that's coming from here. And I think that Bodysnatchers may be one of the best songs to listen to kind of unlock that particular perspective. If you listen to this in the chronology of Radiohead, it's just such a fucking fascinating record in their discography, because it feels so fresh and new, even though they're not taking on things that are completely outside of their wheelhouse. This is all stuff that they've spoken on in one way or another. It's just in a completely different way. And that's why this particular track, I think, leaps out to me as being so emblematic of the album itself, is that it's old ideas, but packaged in a way that makes them feel fresh.
Yeah, beautifully said. Yeah. And definitely, I think a good encapsulation of the immediate appeal of a record like In Rainbows, in terms of that approach, as well as then the layers and the meaning that it has once you start to kind of unwrap it. And I think reflecting on how this record stands out as this separate, very kind of tangibly separate entity from the records that precede it, ties in, or at least wrinkles in nicely with the discussion of the third song on the record, Nude, which is interesting for the fact that it was actually written about 10 years before this album came out, during the time in which they were crafting OK Computer. And in the interim period, it became a live staple as well. It was originally known as Don't Get Any Big Ideas. And if you listen to any of the live recordings, the bootlegs of them performing this, you'll note that it sounds drastically different. Like, it is, in its original form, it was much more akin to the sound of OK Computer. It was this big, booming, airbag-esque, banger song. And so with this interesting appearance on In Rainbows, and this is obviously, we talked briefly, I think, about one or two songs on How to the Thief that were adapted from different earlier versions. And this is a theme that we'll come back to later in the Radiohead discography as well, is this notion of Radiohead tinkering with musical ideas over a long period of time. And sometimes they'll have a song that they worked on in the 90s, like, for instance, Motion Picture Soundtrack, right? It was one of the first songs Thom wrote, I think, like, just ever, and then eventually transformed over time to the point in which we heard it in this radically different form, closing out Kid A. And so Nude is another example of this, except as opposed to getting kind of, I guess, more lush, or as opposed to kind of growing and ballooning, it kind of is more pared back and transformed into this unassuming, gentle beast of a song, as opposed to this colossal banger that it used to be. And I think coming at the third point on the record as well, it's meaningful too, because it represents the first kind of major moment of, I guess, more subdued instrumentation, because you have these two quite eclectic and heavy and intense songs that open the record, and then Nude comes in. It's almost like it's sweeping you into this state of more serenity, I guess. And it is a very curious track to come in at this particular point on the record. And I think a good format pattern here with these kinds of songs is maybe if we turn to August first, because I'd love to hear, August, what your impressions of the song were and how you feel it fits or doesn't fit or whatever into the fabric of this album.
I think Nude is a really good place to take the album in a sense, because we did mention that stripping down the song partakes in, which is both in its instrumentation and in its like actual writing and lyricism. And I feel placing this song earlier in the record rather than later is a smart choice, because I think rather than the band just deciding to structure this album in this kind of building fashion, I think releasing that tension pretty quickly on into the album is a smart idea. And in terms of lyrically, I think the "Don't Get Any Big Ideas" line, I think quite squarely fits in with the thesis so far of disappointment and stagnation in one's life. I like it a fair bit, and I like the clever kind of final line of the song, where it alludes to the innuendo of the song's title, Nude, not referring to nudity, but the stripped back kind of nature of the song. I thought that was a little clever play by the band.
Yes, totally. Yeah. That's a great reading on it. I love everything about this fucking song. There are some days where I would even say that this is my favorite song on the entire album. I'm not even sure if today is one of those days, but I guess we'll find out. But Nude is, it's a disarming song because it is so different, but I do think you need that kind of balance to sort of just kind of even things out a little bit, to fill out the entire breadth of the emotional tenor of the record. And to me, there's a part of this song that, like, I've seen some people call In Rainbows, like, at least as close to Radiohead will get to making as a concept album. And while I don't necessarily agree with that, because I think Thom Yorke's lyricism innately just doesn't exist in like a fixed state. In its best moments, which I think largely do show up on In Rainbows, it's meant to be fluid. Like the rest of the album, this is like a living, breathing organism. This isn't meant to be assigned to a specific meaning. But that said, for Nude, I think part of it is that sort of, especially with how, it's mixed and how different it is. I think that it signifies kind of, I've alluded to how a lot of this album and a lot of what Thom was going through at the time had his fascination with the idea of the myth of Faust and Dante's Inferno. And Nude to me reads as the turning point in the narrative of the album, being that the main character who's expressing this state of disappointment, of dissatisfaction, and even a sort of violent sense of psychosis, like on Bodysnatchers, where he doesn't feel himself, is that the Mephistophelian voice that has bestowed the knowledge that the main character of Faust gets. He gets infinite knowledge, he gets infinite wealth, the constant reminder that this is not going to end the way that he wants it to, just because he's temporarily like slaked his satisfaction doesn't mean that it's all going to be worth it in the end, because in these myths like Faust and Mephistopheles, the devil is not shown as being this purely evil character. He's like the vanguard, the guardian of like darkness and stuff. So it would make more sense for them to not, for him to be like, this is a bad thing, I'm giving you this, but you know, this is still something like they paint him as more of a three-dimensional character, a fallen angel who would be a bit more I guess prone to dispensing advice and telling people that, you know, this is a bad idea, but still ultimately letting them bow to the whims of their own agency, which is being expressed here. And as just a song on a purely sonic level, it's just, oh God, the strings, they're so fucking good. I mean, you can really tell this is one of those songs where it's immediately apparent how much the band had been growing as individual musicians, and their side projects had informed them as individuals and how what they brought to the table. Johnny Greenwood's contributions to this album cannot be understated, in my opinion, and I think this might be the sort of crowning achievement of that kind of peripheral talent. I'm very tempted to say this is my favorite song on the album, but there's like two other tracks here that just it's fucking great.
Shout out Colin as well, whose bass line absolutely anchors this song and is basically a huge part of the sensuality of the arrangement. I think also this song's relationship between its lyrics and the general sound is meaningful in another way as well, which is that this song is kind of presenting the dashing of expectations that the world gives you, right? It's basically from the perspective of this kind of general voice looking down on our protagonist and saying, don't get ambitious, you know what I mean? Don't think that you can achieve more than you have, because you can't, you'll fail. So it's that voice, and the instrumentation being so, I guess, ornate and pretty and conventionally beautiful, I guess, signifies the ways in which that sort of dark, ugly, oppressive messaging is dressed up in this pleasant and attractive veneer, because you're supposed to be lulled into it, you're supposed to not question it, and if it presents itself in this very seductive way, then it becomes harder to deny, harder to refute. So I think that is why it's meaningful that this song with these lyrics is presented in the way that it is, because within this context of the album, this context that Jake has outlined perfectly, it makes more sense in this way, as well as August outlined perfectly, fitting into the fabric of the record, and in terms of pacing and in terms of sound, in terms of impacts, as perfectly as it possibly could. So yeah, I mean, Nude is one of those classic Radiohead songs, I think, that is very difficult to deny the appeal of and the success of in terms of how it's been transformed. And so then we go into a really big fan favorite, Weird Fish's Arpeggi. I've noted in the past that on the Radiohead subreddit, they often do polls, you know, the classic what's the best Radiohead song poll, and it goes for ages and it takes forever. And I've noticed that Weird Fish's Arpeggi tends to turn up as either a high front runner or an outright winner. Whoa. So this is an interesting song in terms of its appeal and in terms of its popularity. And I think maybe at this point in the record as well, one of the examples of a more kind of progressive track in terms of arrangement for Radiohead as well, in terms of how it's structured and where it goes. I think one of the most sort of beguiling and beautiful Radiohead songs, again, that's a theme that will come up a lot as we talk about the songs on this record, especially some of the deeper cuts, is just the sublime beauty that they exist within. as per, I'd love to turn to you, August, and get your thoughts on this curious little weirdo of a song.
I mean, simply put, this is one of my favorite songs the band have ever made. That's not like a controversial statement in any sense. I love the gorgeous crescendo this song that is basically entirely composed of. It's a really it's once again a really nice like individual song structure that just really demonstrates the band's creativity for not just writing verse chorus tracks. And even when they do, there's something a little extra to how those songs play out. I mean, I'm obviously a sucker for a lot of electronic oriented music, so this song having a very distinct and almost galloping programmed drum beat is really a nice touch in terms of where it fits into the record's kind of narrative, air quotes. It feels like this kind of unlocking of ambitions, this kind of plunge into a new world. I think the fish metaphor is very appropriate. This vast ocean of possibilities and ideas which have to be carefully sorted through. And yeah, I really do like this song a ton.
One thing I like what you said is you described it as a programmed drum beat, which it isn't. Well, I think most of, if not all of the drums on this record are played live. But what you're saying there is interesting because there's a specific style of playing on this record from Phil Selway, which is very much a kind of simple pattern that will be looped. Like it won't be looped like specifically in the studio. Like he'll play it over and over and over again. But it will be a kind of repetitive looped style that serves to have this kind of hypnotic function. And it's a very curious link between this record and the next record we're talking about next week, King of Limbs, that I never see made, is the fact that both of these records, for how different they are in lots of other ways, see Radiohead really generally generating focus on this hypnotic aspect that their music can have, particularly in the rhythmic side of things. Like we've talked a lot in the past, I've kind of tried to emphasize Radiohead's increasing interest in rhythm as a focus over melody, which is obviously never to say that it's at the expense of melody, but just that as a musical group, they're far more interested in it. And that's one of the big ways in which it differentiates them from rock music generally and aligns them more closely with electronic music, is the fact that that is where their interests and a lot of their arrangements are centered, particularly on In Rainbows, as it was on Kid A. And so that automatically grounds you in the musicality of this song, right? Phil Selway's and again, the production is crisp as hell. There's not an ounce of reverb on those drums. They're absolutely tight as heck. They are tuned perfectly, and again you have contrast as well, much like we did at the start of 15 Step when you had those really processed drums against that really kind of watery guitar sound, and that again appears here as well. And that as the title suggests, that arpeggiated guitar line that kind of comes in and snakes around that looping drum pattern. It's immediately incredibly hypnotic and beautiful again, and it's like Radiohead are finding new ways to demonstrate how conventionally beautiful they can be in their unconventional way. And I think this is an outstanding song, an incredibly moving and beautiful one. I'm not going to go too much into interpretations because I'm sure Jake will be able to speak to the significance of what the song is lyrically, but I just do want to say that it has a number of some of Radiohead's most just hauntingly beautiful moments. And a lot of that has to do with the way in which Thom fits as a vocal presence into the fabric of the music in this song as well. His tonality here is very tasteful and very gentle, and then that gentleness allows for some moments where he becomes truly emotive that are quite show-stopping as a result of that. Just the way that he extends and sings certain lines, like "I follow you to the edge of the earth and fall off." And my favorite line on this whole album, "Everybody leaves if they get the chance, and this is my chance," a line which just reeks of passion and significance. And then just the general switch up that the song undertakes in its final stretch is quite surprising and show-stopping and stark, and adds this layer of uncertainty to the song. Like, it's building and rising as though there's a sense of great clarity that's being achieved, and then it kind of falls away, and there's this sort of slight dissonance, slight uncertainty in the closing stretch of the song that I really love.
Kind of what August said, the song, it is, like, in my opinion, a sort of perfect follow-up to Nude. This is one of those songs that's really sort of makes itself known, that another big inspiration for Thom when writing all these was just the very nature of seduction, because this is kind of a warped and twisted version of like a seduction. It's very like, you sort of have that point of view of the character who's sort of lost in this vast ocean of possibility that's been given to him because of like what he's sort of gained through the knowledge previous songs. And he's asking himself, why should I stay here? Why should I stay? And like, he's convincing himself of something. Like, I'd be crazy not to follow where you lead. It's like he's following a siren song, and he's describing it like to the bottom of the ocean, where eventually his corpse is eaten by, all these sea creatures and whatnot. I also just have to speak to, Tyler was totally right with the vocals on this song. There's my favorite little detail in the whole song is just how distant and beautiful the little refrain of "way out" comes in at the end of the lines, and like that second verse. It's so fucking gorgeous.
That specific vocal addition is a bit of a Radiohead meme in the fandom, because those vocals are supplied by Ed O'Brien. And it's a bit of a meme that people say that he's singing Ed in the background of the song, which he's obviously not doing. But especially if you watch the video of the basement sessions, and when they record the song, you can see him like really going Ed, and it's really funny.
Yeah, I remember. I'm surprised I didn't pick up on that, but that's fucking good. I like that.
It's a great piece of harmony as well, because of his voice, underrated voice, is perfect for harmonizing with Thom, and that. Well, it's not even really harmonizing. It's just this counterpoint that he gives in the song that adds so much emotional impact to what's happening.
Melding. Yeah. And the sort of like, it's a really dark song, but it's, it's got that whole thing with this album is that it's very much juxtaposing the raw prettiness and organic nature of the song. And, it's, talking about basically being seduced by this thing. Like, you have all this ocean of possibilities, and you're distracted by this one thing, by love, by lust, by this siren song. And it goes perfectly into the next song with the sort of hit the bottom and escape. Like, he finally reaches the bottom of the ocean, even after he's like died and escaped, and like what comes next. It just feels like you're going through like these fucking worlds through each of these songs and just passing through each one into the next. But there's a lyrical through line or a mood or a tone that's always anchoring you, that never makes you feel lost amidst these huge dense sounds that never make it too overwhelming, that always make it comforting but balance it with a distinct unease, I think, that really makes itself known on the second half of the album.
Yeah, absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. So then we go into All I Need, which is kind of the bow around the first half of this record. And one of the moments on the record where the synthetic side of what Radiohead do show up, and in terms of being a greater focus of the musicality, that really sort of synthetic, heavy bass tone that drives both the rhythmic core of the song alongside Phil's, again, really tightly mic'd drumming, but also as almost a melodic point as well. And it's counterpointed nicely in this song by this very delicately employed glockenspiel that is kind of doing its own thing as well. And so this becomes almost like, this is kind of, you could argue, a record that's like 70% ballads, but this has this very kind of more conventional ballad-like tone to it that makes its own structure, and particularly the way the song develops towards its closing, all the more surprising. I think this is a very interesting song, and I'm very curious to hear both of your thoughts on this track musically and thematically. August, what do you think of this song?
Well, I do really like that kind of droning bass line you mentioned earlier, Tyler, because that to me is really that. It's yeah, it's just so instantly catchy and easy to get latched in your mind. And that's another thing I like about this album, that it, in all of its weird ideas, it never forgoes catchiness and just writing an immediate tune. And what really jumped out to me about it, especially this being more on the ballad side, is it feels a lot like a song that could have been written in the time of like the Bends or OK Computer. Obviously this is a very different take on that, and yeah, as a ballad I think it works on just this visceral emotional level, with Tom's voice just kind of gently coasting through the song's early parts. You're all I need. And it's really pretty beautiful song. I think what it speaks to, if I had to get a little conceptual, is perhaps it's like, now that our central character has everything in life, perhaps the idea is now he's searching for true love. It's kind of this idea of looking for something immaterial in life that is more permanent and emotionally resonant than just this kind of ethereal want of money and power and status, but more just affection.
Yeah, absolutely. That's I think that you noting that it's sort of a parallel to Weird Fishes is really important, because I think it's like that sort of siren quality that Weird Fishes has of like the character following something that's beckoning him. I think that's spoken to here because it's like there's sort of a recognition of that. Like the lyrics here, I love how you mentioned that it's like a song that could have been written in the sort of Ben's OK Computer era, because I completely agree, because this song, I think, kind of, it really makes me think of Letdown. And in many ways, I think this is the letdown of not OK Computer, of In Rainbows. That first verse, I'm in the next act, waiting in the wings, I'm an animal trapped in your hot car, I'm all the days that you choose to ignore. So it's like willingly being subservient to this person that has like grabbed the hole on you with their sort of siren call, but still like the chorus saying, you're all I need, you're all I need. It's like this perfect distillation of how one feels in a relationship that has an immense power imbalance. There's also the references like the I'm a moth who just wants to share your light, I'm just an insect trying to get out of the night, I only stick with you because there are no others. And it's just, it perfectly displays this single-minded mindset of like this person who, like, you know, he's given everything, that vast ocean of possibilities, and yet is still focused on this one thing. It's like it's the one thing that really does matter to them is sort of that more definitive romantic affection that sort of August implied that he was looking for. And sort of that outro, you know, that it's all wrong, it's all wrong, it's all wrong, has always been really, really like haunting to me. It's been a real good turning point in the record, and just sort of like, you know, the references to insects. It's again just a perfect melding of everything Radiohead have ever done at the time, but through this new exciting lens. And this is like, you know, again, till that crescendo, it's not a particularly like exciting song. It's a very relaxing kind of ballad-esque thing, and that's why it fucking works.
And it's kind of like unsettling as well, like the syncopation that's used in that bass part, that kind of, it always kind of leaves you feeling a little bit uneasy, just the tone of it and that syncopation. And also the references to insects as well would tie back to your Let Down reference too, if you wanted to draw that connection even further. The song that this reminds me of, weirdly enough, and I guess again it's more in spirit, and this ties into what August was saying, is it's kind of like a Creep sort of song, but like 15 years later. Like it's got the same sort of like deliberate sort of patheticness to the narrator in this song, and that they're willing to kind of subjugate themselves in that way because either they feel it necessary or they don't believe themselves worthy. But there is an unease to the way that this plays out, particularly in that conclusion with the repetition of "it's all wrong, it's all right." This kind of just total meltdown, this total breakdown of mental clarity. That is this very kind of like twisted take on the ultimate lack of conclusiveness of the narrative of the song Creep, right? And so it has the same sort of progression, but obviously the arrangement is so different, and the effect I think is quite different as well, because Creep is this big sort of single track that sort of outlines who Radiohead are and what they represent and their thematic interest, whereas All I Need is an album track ballad that is kind of buried a bit deeper into the record and is a little bit more overtly unsettling. And one of my favorite instrumental details of this whole record is just those gigantic cymbal washes that come in at the conclusion of this track when Phil just starts laying into the cymbal. And that's quite effective as well, because you've had a song that is so clearly constructed around straightforward percussive loops, and then that comes in and it's just like it bashes you open, and it's a great moment musically in the song. And so that's the first half of the album. And then we get the album's second half, which is, I think, a more curious half of the record that you're ushered into with the unassuming serenity of Faust Arp, which I guess, again, that title sort of alludes to some of the literary references that Jake has already brought up. And it's this very interesting sort of, it's almost like an interlude, but there's also a lot happening musically, especially the relationship between the very simple guitar pattern and, again, those very ornate string arrangements from Johnny. I'm curious, I don't particularly want to spend too much time on this song because it is a little more of a bridging point, but I feel that I would be remiss to overlook it entirely. So I'm curious from the two of you how you feel about the song and what it adds to the record.
I think it's kind of you kind of spoke to it as kind of an interlude, and it is of sorts. It's a prefer song, and it's not a song that's as obviously as dense as the others, but it's so warm and pretty and minimal that it just, it fits into the album like a glove. And, I think it's also important that I say this, like when I talk about my interpretations, or when any of us talk about the interpretations of this album, I think that it's important to remember that it's sort of like, this is a record that's the joy in it is that I can listen to it 7 days out of a week, and each day I can write you a different version of what I think each song means. And it's sort of designed to be that way, in this constant motion. And here, to me, this is sort of it's kind of got like this really subtle call response thing about it, of like where the lyrics are like tugging and ebbing and flowing, of just like the watch me fall like dominoes, on again, off again, on again. It's sort of the elaboration of what the subservience that they were talking about in the previous songs, but this is like that in motion. If honest to God, what it really reminds me of is the structure and the themes employed specifically on a song that takes place at a similar point on the album, which is Tyler the Creator's Igor. Actually, it has a very similar trajectory, in my opinion. But this is sort of the I'd almost call it like the gone thank you part of the album, where it's sort of the acknowledgement that this has gone too far, that it's like there's a point on it where they say I love you, but enough is enough that stuff, there's no real reason, you got a head full of feathers, you got melted to butter. And I think it's just sort of like in awakening, it's sort of like a snapping out of it and then coming to getting above your head above the water and kind of seeing what's on the other side, and that other side is what follows.
No, I like the instrumental a lot. I think it's really pretty sounding. I really love the progression of it, the way it builds. Lyrics, it's far from the most compelling moment on here, is what I will say. That's about all I have to say. There's
Fair enough.
More interesting pastures right ahead.
I definitely think this, if I had to pick a least favorite, this would probably be it. But I value the bridge that it serves in terms of bringing you down from the absolute intensity of All I Need's finale, and then sort of setting up the shock to the system that Reckoner is, which, you know, is well known and beloved as, again, one of Radiohead's best songs by and large. I have lots of thoughts on this track, but I don't want to get ahead of myself, and I certainly don't want to upstage August, who, again, it's his first time experiencing this record and discussing the discography of Radiohead. So, August, I'm very curious how you feel about Reckoner, and what thoughts you had listening to it, and where you feel it sits in the record.
I guess the first thing I really like about it is I really think it kind of keeps up with a lot of tracks like Weird Fishes, with this very tropical, pretty, and I guess tropical, now that I think about it, is the word I would use to describe a lot of the sound of this album. The drums on here in particular, are the rhythm is like this really tribal, like I really love that kind of tribal rhythm section. I love the guitar part here that kind of guides you through this song. Once again, it's that very watery kind of aquatic guitar tone. And lyrically, this song is rather interesting in that it feels to me like it's this kind of great, I don't know, it's a tough song to describe, because it's about, I think, as abstract as the record gets with its lyricism and writing.
To me, if Faust Arp is sort of, you know, the moment of clarity you get after being submerged in all of this beforehand, which, you know, like at some point you can come to the conclusion that maybe it isn't exactly love or lust, but like just passion for, or like a drive, or just something in life that the album's referring to sort of in its earlier state of just maybe something that's a little bit more primal. Maybe it's less specific. But with Reckoner, the title and some of the lyrics here, I think this is the sort of the moment on the album that sort of shows the divine side on like a more benevolent level, maybe not necessarily like a god, but sort of like a being that sort of is meant to comfort him after coming out on the other side of just, you know, talking, saying, "You are not to blame for the bittersweet distractors, do not speak its name," just sort of the things that led them astray on the previous parts of the record. And I think that like it's sort of a moment of them like forgiving him and accepting like what they did was maybe not wrong, but that they were in fact led astray. And just the idea of, you know, Reckoner, take me with you. And I there's something so like comforting about this track sonically that I feel like sort of meets in the middle of the like lyrical content of just like assuring someone, being there for someone. It's like a hug. It's just like, hey, this was some shit, but you know, everybody fucks up sometimes, and that's sort of the like the reprieve, I guess I would call it, on the thematic part of the album.
Yeah, absolutely. This song, I think, is absolutely breathtaking. It's one of my absolute favorite Radiohead songs. Not a hot take. A lot of people have it, regard it that highly. To me, it's like a 5-minute stretch of catharsis. We've talked about some of the most cathartic moments in Radiohead's discography before. We've talked about songs like Let Down and songs like How to Disappear Completely that balloon to these enormous conclusions, and it's almost as though a song like Reckoner maintains that emotional tone for its entire runtime while starting while being this kind of very curious arrangement. Obviously, the first thing that jumps out at you is the percussion. The combination of, again, those real cymbal crashing that Phil is doing, as well as the tambourine playing as well, which adds this little, I think it's a tambourine, it's this kind of shaker drum anyway, that adds this extra layer to it. It's immediately kind of an overwhelming layer of percussion that's happening. It almost feels as though it is simulating voices or simulating chatter or simulating some kind of the noise of the world. And then the guitar line that comes in is just starkly beautiful. I like that. This doesn't really add to any thoughts I have on the song, but I like that I read that Thom said that guitar line was inspired by the guitar work of John Frusciante of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, who has this very unique style of his own. And particularly if you check out his solo records as well, you can hear some of that in a more unadorned way. But yeah, it's an incredibly beautiful looping guitar line, and again, the simplicity of it is key. It's simple, but it's also kind of a bit unusual in the way it progresses, and it's a very kind of haunting counterpoint against that wall of noise. And it very much feels as though the guitar line, in tandem with the piano that enters as well, is almost like it is embodying the protagonist of this song in terms of the music taking on an embodiment, whereas the percussive wall is the world that they are, or the hell, if you want to dive deeper into the Faustian side of things that this protagonist is facing. Reckoner, I believe that word itself is a Faustian reference to Mephistopheles, the devil. And so in many ways, it feels like our protagonist is kind of reckoning, there we go, is that title again, with some epiphany that needs to be made, some understanding that needs to be made about the ultimate relationship between all things, and the ultimate distance and difference between all things, the ultimate inability to remain, the kind of inevitability of passing on, the sense that you can never stay in the same place for too long. And it's this really beautiful realization to me that despite all of the, I guess, difficulties and struggles that the narrator has dealt with throughout this album, it feels like a moment of acceptance of the great, wheel of time marching on, and this great understanding that we're all just here for a short amount of time. And it's a very simple thing, I think, and it's communicated beautifully, elegantly, with those very sparse lyrics and those vague kind of Faustian callbacks that have been peppered throughout this record. And I also think that the song ties in very nicely to the closing track of this album as well, which we'll obviously get to very soon. But it's this moment of ballooning catharsis that I think leads us into House of Cards, the 8th song on this record, beautifully, because again, Reckoner has this sweep to it, and especially when those strings come in at the end, and it's very just like, it's colossal. It's understated but colossal at the same time. It's a weird fusion of feelings.
Have always reminded me of Hans Zimmer's score for Inception.
Well,
if you listen to the song Time, I guarantee you'd be like, oh shit.
Yeah, he definitely took some liberties, probably borrowing that tone, but it's also just perhaps speaks to the overall emotional tone of that particular melody and arrangement that gives a giant sense of sweeping hugeness to both of those pieces of music. But anyway, House of Cards comes in, and it's like a reprieve. It's like a moment to breathe. And it also has, I think, some of the most beautiful tones on this album. And I want to leap straight into it and shout out Ed O'Brien, because we've referenced Ed throughout this record. He is the forgotten member of the 5 core people in Radiohead, in the sense because he's this malleable person who is primarily a guitar player, but is not generally noticed as much as people like Johnny or Thom, especially because, there's 3 guitar players in this band. And but what he does is so unique and idiosyncratic, and is such a huge part of the Radiohead sound and of the uniqueness of Radiohead. And House of Cards, I think, is Ed's real moment to shine, because alongside that very simple, elegant, melodic swing that you have, there are these. I think what makes or breaks the song is because it's a very sparse, very minimal arrangement, and Thom is almost using his voice in a sense as a texture more than anything else as well. Particularly the way he hangs on certain words like denial, as if he's turning them into their own melody, and also the backing vocals that come in towards the end of the song with "Your ears should be burning." They're very textural, they're very kind of melodic, and they're sitting in there. But what I love is what Ed's doing, which is all of that white noise that you hear in the song, all of that kind of rising, erupting guitar sound that you hear in the backdrop of this song, adding this tension to it. And it's a very minimal, it's a very understated track, but I think that it's super effective for what it is in terms of how beautifully it negotiates the relationship between that gently lilting guitar tone, that fucking colossal, guitar thing, that feedback thing that Ed's doing, and then Thom's voice itself. It's definitely not one of the more show-stopping moments on the record, and it's definitely not one of the more outstanding songs, I don't think. But I also think in a weird way that it's maybe a little bit underrated as a result of that. And it shows a great example of the ebb and flow of this album in terms of pulling you along and then kind of letting you, certain moments just kind of pulling you along tightly, and other moments just sort of letting you go and letting you float out to sea. And I think that's one of the joys of House of Cards, is that in making this grand realization with Reckoner, you're then, I guess, gifted a certain freedom that House of Cards represents, a certain ability to drift. And perhaps that's really intangible and weird and makes no sense, but that's how I feel when I'm listening to this track. It's this beautiful sense of letting go that this song has, and I'm able to just kind of melt into it, which is a certain appeal that it might not have for everyone, but it does for me.
I'll just basically second most of what Tyler just said, is that I think this sort of title, House of Cards, is referring to a state of fragility. You've bounced back now, and it seems that the idea of the song is trying to go back and pursue the sensuality, the desire, the lust that had them so enraptured in that first half, but to do so with a sense of detachment, in the I don't want to be your friend, I just want to be your lover, no how it ends, no matter how it starts, trying to chase that connection while doing your best to sort of walk the tightrope and not fall victim to the traps that you might have felt previously. Just sort of like trying to employ this half measure and seeing if you don't get hurt now that you go around that way in the block, which I think can apply to many other meanings than just love. Like it could be just, the pursuit of drive and knowledge, or just creative callings that you might feel that you maybe fail at, but then return to and try to use what you've learned. But that sort of House of Cards thing is sort of alluding to the fact that it's not that easy, and that you could, one card gets moved out of place and the whole structure will collapse. And that's sort of what the song is too, is, denial, that sort of refrain over and over again of being like, you thinking that you can do this and ignoring all of the potential drawbacks is just you being like, no, I'm good, I can do this, I've got this time. But you're just kind of blunt, you're just sort of shoving it aside.
To me, like, I think the presentation of the song often just gets, Thom is doing a love song, and it's like, no, I think that is entirely metaphorical, and I think you've got to read it through the lens of the rest of this record to really, I guess, see its place. And again, we've had that song Reckoner, which is about, I guess, the realization of the intangibility, the impermanence of all things. And so House of Cards is kind of like, and once you have that understanding, it's a freedom, as I've said, and it's the freedom to forget about the imposing structure and the clear desire to organize and construct things in your life, and to just surrender to the unknown, essentially surrender to the unknowability, not to try to, create a fabric, a foundation to control it, to predict it, but to just let whatever will happen. That's, I think, what the song is about. It's just about being able to live your life by not trying to add constraints to everything, to get rid of your fear of not understanding. You just accept you're not understanding, and you get a more closer and beautiful relationship with the world, more akin to a love than a friendship, and you get a sense of solace and a sense of actual freedom out of that. I mean, that's what I think anyway when I read it, and that's why I think the song is so low key and relaxed in terms of its approach musically as well. But yeah, August, do you have anything thoughts you want to add on this song?
Yeah, a little. mainly that. I think, yeah, Ed O'Brien's contributions, as you said, are great, but I think what even accentuates them is like this subtle modulation throughout the song between that like haze and the guitar part, where the levels of the two I think stay fairly consistent, but occasionally like one will dip over the other, and that'll happen throughout the song. And I really do like how that happens in those little moments, because it adds this, yeah, ethereal, ghostly quality to the song, like this yeah, next stage of existence, as you two have spoken on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you go into the penultimate song on the record, Jigsaw Falling Into Place, which is again another sort of curveball on the album. I would argue a really smart one in terms of this record sort of threatening on with its second half to go into this place of purely dreamlike stasis, which would certainly be a justifiable direction, but I think that Jigsaw Falling Into Place gives the album a curious punch in the arm.
Just as we've kind of had these two songs paralleling each other, theme going on, the first two tracks, Weird Fishes, and the song after that. But I think this is definitely the positive, the sort of yin to the yang of the previous track. And it's the previous track is sort of, House of Cards. It's fragile. It's like it's a warning. It's sort of a like, you're in denial. It's the possibility that you might not have learned from the mistakes that you've made. Whereas this is exploring the part of it that's like, life is multifaceted. You're not going to always 100% be in the clear, or you're not going to always 100% be in the dark. And this is sort of one of the moments of euphoria that you can get from moving forward. This is a song that Thom has alluded that it's a little bit autobiographical in a sense that it's based off of, at least loosely, a night that he and the band spent together, I think at a nightclub, and that it was just like it was a good time, and they all look back on it fondly. And I think that sort of memory is the purpose of just sort of displaying the full breadth of the emotional spectrum here, because before it was using that pursuit of lust, of love, or of passion to kind of blind oneself, whereas this is a more successful pursuit. It's euphoric. It's mainly about living in the moment. Maybe even you could make the argument for it being about like drugs or drinking, in the sense that you do this and you're putting off whatever happens next. You have the sort of the beat goes round and round, like it's almost you want to get up and dance almost. And closed circuit cameras before you're comatose. It's just like trying to live up as much as possible before you just fucking drop. And there's this sort of desire to kind of blow everything out and just see what you want to see. Things. One of my favorite lyrics on the record is, "Words are blunt instruments. Words are sawn off shotguns," as if they apply anything other than the instinctual, primal joy that they feel of being in a place like that and exposing themselves to a world like that. That if you get anything else, it will like topple you, like a House of Cards, for instance. And I just love the fucking way that the normal sort of, guitar, it's kind of upbeat, it's kind of spry, and then it just, the beat goes round.
Yeah. To me,
it gets the people going.
To me, this, I would agree, this is an extension of the last song in terms of being about having this freedom to lose yourself. And I think the reason it's meaningfully placed on the record is that it takes that feeling that's explored kind of abstractly in House of Cards. In fact, just generally, I think the second half of this record moves from a place of pure abstraction to a place of tangible familiarity, piece by piece, from song to song. And this is almost like the bridge from House of Cards to Videotape, in the sense that it's the bridge from the ideas that are explored in this intangible Faustian world to that layering on top of actual reality, right? The House of Cards is the song about embracing the, I guess, unknowability and unpredictability and just raw reality of things in this, abstract space. And then Jigsaw Falling Into Place layers that feeling on top of this story that's being told. But what's great about it is that it tells this story, gives you enough information to see the story taking place and what the actual, I guess, visual presentation of it is. But it also uses just enough sort of surreal and not quite clear imagery, like with the walls abandoned shape. They've got a Cheshire cat grin, and the references to night owls and animal noises and stuff. Like there's just enough here to make it feel a bit, to not make it feel too clean. And those lines you referred to as well, words of blunt instruments, words of sawn off shotguns as well, I guess fits in there as well. And so there's a sense of it's a sense of kind of cutting loose, of letting it all out right in the song, but also there's a sense of tension here as well. Like the song builds and builds and builds in the way that it does. It's kind of frantic in terms of the vocal delivery as well. Thom's kind of getting more and more intense as the song goes on, and the instrumentation is moving with him as well. So there's a great sort of synergy happening there. And then everything kind of resolves in the final part of the chorus at the very end of the song. And so I think it's a really interesting, unexpected, but satisfying wrinkle in this album at this point.
Basically, it's that fucking meme of that guy outside the club, and he's just like, the alcohol is flowing, the music is bumping, there is no pain in this room tonight. That's this song.
I think in a sense, this song kind of opens itself in a similar place to where House of Cards was, still keeping in this very ghostly, kind of haunting, atmospheric lane. But
those
yeah,
vocals in the background, like
yeah, those really aid to that. And yeah, in a sense, the song really does come to life, if I want to use a tacky metaphor. And I do agree with a lot of kind of Jake's sentiment about the song. I think the vocal delivery, that kind of almost rambly, drunken quality Thom has to his voice, really adds to that even more. It's just a really exciting song, and I think its place in the album has been pretty well spoken upon. At least I agree with that perspective you guys have. It's good.
I love the way he just howls, wish away the nightmare, wish away the nightmare, you got a light, you can feel it on your back. Again, a great example of how Thom can have a lot of vocal presence and vocal, I guess, unusualness. Like it reminds me of the slurred and sort of very fast-paced vocal delivery reminds me of Wolf at the Door from How to the Thief, in the sense that he's doing something with his voice that you don't quite expect him to do, and it's this very sort of like different approach vocally that aids the feeling of the song and the subject in a big way. And then you go into Videotape, the closing track of this record, which has its own sort of backstory, much like Nude does. This is similar to that song. This is a song that went through many, many different forms before it was officially released. There is an iconic recording of them playing this song at a 2006 festival at Bonnaroo, and that's a very iconic recording because if you watch and listen to that recording, I should have sent it in the Discord, but I forgot to. If you watch and listen to that recording, it's not a million miles away from the version you hear on this record, but it's much more aggressive. It's much faster paced. It has a lot more urgency to it, even if it's based around that core piano melody. It's much more guitar is integrated into it, and it gets very kind of emotional and intense. Whereas the version of Videotape that you hear on this record is very different. Famous bit of backstory as well. This is one of the most labored over pieces of music that Radiohead had ever released. It's one of those weird instances where it became so frustrating to get this song right that it nearly blew up the recording process of the entire album. And it was one of those instances of one day there was this moment of clarity where we finally understood exactly how to do it. And it's quite, it's unassuming when you listen to it. But a lot of words have been shared on Videotape, and what's interesting about it musically, particularly the way that it uses syncopation in a really unusual way. But we'll get into that. as well as the emotional significance of the song on this record, how it ends things in this very specific and quite heartbreaking place. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this song, both of you. The musicality of it, the sentiment of it, and where it ends the record, and how it kind of ties a bow on In Rainbows.
I think this jumps out to me as one of the band's most just outwardly mournful, sad tracks they've ever put down. Like that kind of a loop, those looped piano keys are a really kind of great through line throughout this song. I love that weird kind of almost metronome sounding drum pattern, which I will have to presume is Phil playing live, because that is what I have been. Yeah, that's what I've been led to believe. So, I mean that in itself, that foundation to the song is interesting enough, and to me, this is one of the more direct songs on the album, especially with those opening lines. When I'm at the pearly gates, this will be on my videotape. This kind of very outward acknowledgement of death and dying, and in a sense leaving something behind for the world. Like having a legacy is, I think, a lot of what this song is broadly about. And that can seem a little disconnected to the rest of the record on its head, but when you kind of dig into this song, it becomes clear that legacy is not one of like this wealth and power our central character had, but to me more a legacy of just who he was as a person rather than as a figurehead, as a symbol. I think that's really what this is speaking to.
I think if you read it through the lens of that sort of theme of intangibility, of impermanence, of the everything having to come to an end and the acceptance of that, then this song becomes even more poignant, because it's this notion that this is my way of saying goodbye because I can do it face to face. It is a goodbye that is rendered tangible, that is turned into this thing that will exist beyond the person, right? Rather than just a goodbye face to face, which is this thing that is gone as soon as it happens. This character is choosing to document and record their goodbye in red, blue, green. And I guess, again, it sort of ties what's happening to the physical world as well through that medium. But it exists, I think, as you say, as this way of transcending death. And in that sense, it becomes, to me personally, very moving and quite powerful. And I love, again, instrumentally, musically, Radiohead do so much creative to complement that. You have those really iterating piano chords that are syncopated, where the beat is not where it seems to be, and that's clarified by the percussion when it comes in, and initially just quite kind of sharp and slotting, almost as though it's kind of cutting through the melody, and then eventually kind of getting more and more, I guess, weird and infected and growing and rattling. And what I love about it is that it's almost like a visual representation of the videotape imagery, right? It sounds like a tape that's unspooling and is kind of like starting to rattle around. It's a great piece of I guess, onomatopoeia, even with that percussive pattern. It's very, very cool. And just the way the song gets more unsettling and more with those ghostly vocals as well, which again, we've talked about the ways in which ghostly vocals are employed on this record to powerful effect. And I think nowhere stronger is that shown than here. It's a very elemental track where every single piece of instrumentation and every single line without fail is deeply affecting.
I think the thing that strikes me the most about Videotape is just what an emotionally complicated song it is. because of the lack of kind of specifics, the way they're able to conjure up just enough with the ideas, narrative, character, and imagery and all that, but never enough to pigeonhole it. Videotape is like one of those highly, I guess, interpretive songs where it's like, I don't know if the main character of this has found peace in what he's doing, because he does allude that, don't worry, this day has been the most perfect day for me, which I think actually makes this comparable to another band that we've covered with a song with tape in the title, and that would be Deftones' Sex Tape, which is a song about living inside of a moment forever. And I also definitely think that's what this is it's living inside. You've channeled it into something physical, something analog, something tangible. And maybe he wants to give it to his loved ones. Maybe that's how he's decided to go about that. Maybe he's in complete fucking denial and none of it matters at all, but it's just that he's dead. But it's just like every single time I hear it, it allows you that sort of like, one of my favorite decisions about the song is just the final minute of it is just that cycling percussion pattern over and over again until it ends. And it's like a perfect way of sorting out your own feelings about the album, about the song, just kind of giving you that repetition sort of gets, the juices in the head flowing. It also makes me think a lot of the end of Synecdoche, New York, where you sort of have that like narrative sort of thing going on, and then it kind of sits there and then it ends, and then there's like this really heartbreaking moment as everything stops, and then there's sort of an implied continuation thereafter. And this has a very similar tenor to it, and it's just it's haunting, it's beautiful, maybe it's hopeful, maybe it's melancholy, maybe it's tragic, but overall it's just one of the best songs on, at least what I would argue is the best Radiohead album. You need a closer of no lesser quality than this one to be able to pull it off, and they did. It's just such a fucking achievement of a song in every way that they look to see to go after. They shot for the moon and they hit the fucking moon.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite Radiohead songs, just generally. I find it
Definitely.
to be, again, elementally simple and just executed to perfection. Very unfussy, and nothing more added to it than needs to be there. One thing I want to say, just to tie it up, is that as well, this song alludes to just draw things back to Faust again, that connection that Jake made initially at the top. This very much brings the Faustian theme full circle, and in many ways kind of encapsulates the peace of Faust, realizing the beauty of the world beyond death. Today, I know today has been the most perfect day I've ever seen, despite the fact that Mephistopheles is reaching up to grab me. I've kind of been able to defeat that. I've been able to end my life and leave my existence in this place that I have decided, that I have defined, that I have created. And it's a very effective and beautiful bow on In Rainbows, the album. So I guess before we go into our favorite tracks and ratings, I just wanted to have a little bit of a mini segment here to give the three of us a chance to talk about any of the bonus tracks of this record that we want to. Don't have to talk about all of them, but I know, August, you spent some time in the last few days checking those out as well. So if there's any songs you want to shout out, or any songs you think are particularly interesting for any reason, jump that in here. I know I have a couple that I really love.
I've really only got one of those songs that I love, because generally I kind of understood why all of them were B-sides, and I was like, yeah, this wouldn't really fit on here. But the one I really loved and connected with was the last one, 4 Minute Warning, which I thought was this really beautiful song that harkened back to those apocalyptic, bleak elements of a Kid A or an OK Computer, while still feeling relatively progressive in its sound for the band. I thought it has that same distinct upbeat feeling as a track like No Surprises, in that contrast and juxtaposition of imagery. I really did like this track in particular a ton.
Jake,
shout out Last Flowers.
Yeah.
Last Flowers, like if any of the songs on the B-sides could have fit into the album proper, I would argue that it's that one. But I mean, that aside, it's just a fantastic fucking song. If you haven't heard the fucking B-sides to this, like, I also just kind of, definitely prefer the album the way it is. I think it's tight, I think it's interlocked. I really wouldn't change anything about it. But that said, the songs that came out of these sessions are absolutely still worth hearing because they're all pretty fucking great. If it was like its own thing, like in the, if you made it like an EP or whatever, and it was pretty consistent, like if that had to be in the Radiohead discography, it would probably be in like the direct middle, which is still a fucking good job.
Yeah, I'll push. I don't think it would fit on the album, but I do want, just because it's about this very distinct thing, which is about, I guess, this disconnection from the world, and it's about that in a way that feels quite different to the way that the songs in Rainbows are about that. It's a little bit more direct, and it almost seems to be about this perspective of this aging person who is unable to, I guess, process or deal with the world. But it's an incredibly beautiful song. I particularly love the way in which it develops towards the conclusion with that repetition of it's too much, it's too bright, it's too powerful. It's a great example of Radiohead knowing how to find the emotional climax of a song without leaning into sentimentalism or taking it in a direction that's particularly predictable. It ends in quite a powerful place. I'm very fond of Go Slowly as well, which is feels to me like it's again very elementally simple, not very many lyrics, but it feels just deeply moving, and it feels very much akin to a lot of the songs that in Rainbows that deal with mortality and dying and crossing over. And I love that aspect of it. I find it really, really powerful. Yeah, and I think there's also some bangers on the second disc as well. Down Is the New Up and Up on the Ladder are really, again, very akin to the more rhythmically focused rock songs of in Rainbows. Down Is the New Up has that great sort of string section in the Down Is the New Up part, which I think is a really cool melodic thing that is very unique for Radiohead. Also special shout out to Bangers and Mash as well, which is just an absolute riot of a song. Definitely would not have fit on In Rainbows, but also like it's again, just an absolute gnarly piece of work. I kind of hated it the first time I heard it, but I've come to really, really like it, especially just the venom in Thom's voice when he's sort of singing like, you bit me, I got the poison. It's really, it's really great. And I think the groove on this song is awesome too. And again, the way that they use loops here, the song's basically just a whole loop over and over and over with modulations happening. Again, very predictive of King of Limbs' musical direction as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, Radiohead in Rainbows. Killer record.
Pretty fucking good.
The bangers were streaming out of them. And so now it is time to go to our favorite tracks and ratings. As per usual, August, you can go last. My three favorite tracks in Rainbows, the album, are Reckoner, Videotape, and probably Weird Fishes, although shout out to Bodysnatchers as well. Least favorite, I don't have one. It's a 10 out of 10. Saoirse and Morgan have both given it a 10 out of 10 also. Jake.
This is a tough one just because it's one of those, it's a fluid album. So you kind of listen to it. Maybe 1 week you prefer one week you prefer the other. But right now, I'm going to say my favorite song on here is Nude. I'm going to say close second place would be Videotape. And 3, I'll say Weird Fishes, Arpeggi. Least favorite, I definitely do not have one. This is a pretty fucking hard 10. If we hadn't fucking talked about 3 other, we've talked about my entire top 4 now. If not for D-Last in the Comatorium, Painting of a Panic Attack, and Punisher, this would be my favorite album. Those are the only things that keep it away.
All right. August.
3 favorite tracks on here are gonna be Videotape, Weird Fishes, Arpeggi, and Bodysnatchers. Least favorite is Faust Arp. I will give this an 8 out of 10.
Hell yeah.
Antonio Banderas gif engaged.
Beautiful. Well, heck, that gives us an average rating of 9.6
Jesus
for In
fucking
Rainbows.
Christ.
And that is the highest average of a Radiohead record that we have reviewed, and I suspect will end up being the highest by the time we finish this. I don't see anything
King of
overtaking it.
Limbs pull through.
So yeah, other records we've given a 9.6 over the year.
Paranul?
Yes,
Yeah.
Paranul. Stephen Wilson's Hand Cannot Erase, quite meaningfully. Another 10. Another record where we have the exact same rating pattern of
Oh,
Jake,
that's funny.
Morgan, Saoirse, and me giving it a 10 and August giving it an 8, which is
That's
effectively, close enough to a 10 for August's standard. We also have Tom Waits' Bone Machine at a 9.6 as well. We have Blackwater Park at a 9.6
cat.
from Opeth. And Panopticon's new record, And Again Into the Light, is also at a 9.6 as well. Anyway, so at home, let us know what In Rainbows means to you. Please leave a comment in the comments below. We read all of them. We love them. Let us know what this record means to you. Let us know if you have any additional interpretations of these songs as well, because obviously we can't cover everything, and some of these songs are quite broad in what they could be about. Let us know in the comments below what you think. Also, let us know what you thought of this video as well. If you think what we did well, if we think we could do anything better.
We got two episodes to fix this format if it's not working out for you. So
yeah, I think we've pretty much done a pretty good job, as well as I could hope we could have done for this album.
This is our videotape.
Yep. No matter what happens yet, I know this will be the highest rated Radiohead album we've ever reviewed.
Fucking
Anyway.
Tyler just aching.
Anyway, no, I'm really happy with how things have fallen in this series so far. But yeah, good video. August, take us out.
as always, everyone, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Skittles, taste the rainbow.